Hey.
Hello. I feel like the way we've welcomed people over the last while has always been like come into our portal hands, like come into the story engine. We're engineering to the thing. Hello everyone, and thank you all for joining us on our first live stream of 2024 of the Story Engine and Lord Masters deck. Yay! Welcome. I'm Miroki Tong. If you guys haven't met me before, I am the CEO of the Story Engine and the project director behind Lore Masters deck, which was our latest crowdfunding campaign on BackerKit. And Peter, why don't you tell all the folks who you are if they haven't met you yet?
Yeah, I am Peter Chakowski. I designed the Story Engine, Deck of Worlds, and Lore Masters deck. And that's me.
Short and sweet. How about you, Eric?
Hello. Yes, I am Eric. I am the community manager for the Story Engine. I did some of the writing for Lore Masters deck as well. We'll keep it short.
Yes. And together we make this little trifecta. Obviously, there's a lot of other amazing members who contributed to the deck as well. I'm sure we're going to get into that throughout the live stream. If our eyes are wandering, it's because Facebook was being mean and being like, we're not streaming to Facebook. But that's okay. I see most of you on YouTube. Thank you all for joining us. And we are counting down the days to the release of the open beta, which I hope that you guys are excited for. For those of you who have pledged to the deck, if you guys are excited, please drop a note into the chat and let us know what all your feelings are, or what are your plans for the open beta. For anyone who has pledged to Lore Masters deck campaign for the main deck in some way, shape, or form, you will be getting a copy of the open beta come February 8th. Am I bearing the lead? I feel like that might be my excitement here, Peter. I'm just like, and here's everything that's about to happen. Let's just go right into it.
Yeah, no, I think you covered it. Like I'm really excited to like today we're going to sort of do a talk about the process behind the deck to sort of like this is the Star Wars prequels building excitement for the Star Wars original trilogy.
Except actually happening in chronological order.
Yeah.
Is that really the comparison we want to go with?
Well, the other option would be describing it more like Matrix 2 because the Reloaded title. But no. Basically, I want to show you guys the cool and intricate and awkward childhood of the Lore Masters deck. And then we're gonna we're actually gonna be distributing the files live on air next week on Thursday at the same time. So you're gonna be like able to open up your files with us, and then we'll dive into prompts. But today we wanted to sort of show you the whole behind the scenes. We're gonna be doing a walkthrough of like the deck timeline, and also we've been taking your questions, and you can continue to add questions to the chat. So that'll be a little piece of it too. Yeah.
And our pre-order or our open beta party is going to happen at the same time next week. So I think a couple of you, not to name names, I know you guys came bright, like super early, because of just time zone stuff. And like, you know what, we literally had this thing. So we actually are doing another webinar with BackerKit tomorrow, and I think we're on like, I don't know, like 5 time zones between the all of us who are organizing the event, and we kept being like, wait, so is like 11 a.m. Pacific time the same as 2 p.m. Eastern time? And then Peter, what's that in Atlantic time? And so totally get why time zones are like extremely confusing. But at the same time next week, which is 3 p.m. Eastern time, 4 p.m. Atlantic time per Peter, 12 p.m. Pacific time per US coasters. Have I covered the basis of most of them? 1 p.m. Mountain Time, 2 p.m. Central Time. I'm not going to jump into Australia or Europe. I'll let you guys do the math on it. But next week at this time, we will be launching together. So if you guys all want to come, and if you have friends who you know have pledged the deck or have been considering getting a pre-order and kind of want like a very early sneak peek of it and get in their hot little hands right away, do a pre-order before the 8th, and then join us on the live stream where we can all like get the amazement of the deck kind of hitting our inboxes, and we can all play together.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
I am too.
Yeah. There's also a couple other little nuggets coming up in this stream that I'm excited for. Just like weird things that I forgot existed on the development path. Going back to old notebooks, there was some fun little corners of the notes that where I got to rediscover that I'd completely forgotten about. I'm excited to get into, so a lot to look forward to.
That's good. No, that's good. That's good. If let's see. Well, I think I know questions already come. And also, like, this is an opportunity, guys. I know we said it in our banner, but if you guys have questions for us, please do drop them in the chat. I know we've asked you guys to send us questions either in the Backer Kit community forum or also through email. You know, when we send out newsletters, you're like, we have real humans reading the responses. So feel free to always hit reply and reach out to one of us directly. But Eric will be amazingly monitoring the chats throughout the hour. And this is a really good opportunity for us to, like, yeah, like as Peter said, share the development process with you. I feel like even I learned things. Like I remember when he was sending me pictures of his notebooks. If you guys have been watching some of the updates, I was like, I don't even know what that notebook existed. So the things that goes on in the inventor's basement.
Yeah. Because I took screenshots of all the juicy bits that'll be fun to talk about, but I also I just straight up have the books here. So if you got questions, we can poke through and figure things out together. The only thing I couldn't find during my searches was I couldn't find any of the paper copies of the early Lore Masters decks.
Oh, like the little like post-it notes?
Yeah, the post-it note ones. I've moved
Oh, no.
since doing those initial early paper prototypes, and I think I lost them in the move. If I find them again, I'm going to pull them out. But in the meantime, I've got I've got my notebooks. I'm gonna actually I'll pull up the demo screen for a sec here. We've got notebooks. These are the two notebooks that have relevant notes. There are some paper copies of the expansions that I was playtesting, which we won't use, but I thought I'd bust out at some point. We've got the early tokens, which you'll recognize from our early live streams. This was the alpha, which looks very pretty, and it was the version that we took photographs of for the main deck. But the thing that I'm going to clear some room for, just to before we dive into the process, this was the really unexpected find. Was the story engine deck, the original story engine deck prototype, which I carried around in a bag of freezer blueberries. This was just how I kept them all together. This traveled with me to a number of conventions because I was working on it on the road. This would have been from, I guess, early 2019 throughout 2019, and they weren't in square cards yet.
I have so many questions about these blueberries.
I want to know why, like all the bags that you could have, Peter, like that you could have used, you picked this blueberry bag. Like, why?
I am almost certain that what happened was this is the kind of thing that my parents keep. And I'm pretty sure the first drafts of the story engine deck I started working at while visiting them. I was living in London, England, and coming back fairly often to Canada for conventions. This is pre-COVID. And this is exactly the kind of thing that my parents would keep so they could use it for storage later. And I'm pretty sure that, they're keeping everything in case it's useful, which, by the way, I found out my Dutch ancestors have been doing that for 200 years. Almost every note in the family tree, there's a family genealogist who went back and just sort of did interviews. Every note in the family tree is people would keep a tiny piece of string in case it was useful. They would keep a single nail if it fell out of something. They would keep that nail for years. So my parents do this. They keep old bags, and I ended up using that for storage because it was just convenient when I was visiting them.
How well was it washed, or do the cards have a distinct blueberry flavor?
Let me report back on that right now.
No
blueberry flavor, unfortunately. I was you had me hoping.
I was gonna say I'm notoriously well known for doing exactly what your ancestors do. So maybe the Dutch and the Chinese have ties or shared tips on storage in the past. I similarly hold on to pieces of string, and I have a tendency to cut my wrapping paper really delicately with knives, and then I fold it all back up and I reuse it. And that's probably the environmentalist in me also really kicking in.
Yeah.
I have to really take my hat off for the keeping the blueberry bag though. The freezer bag is definitely not one that I've ever considered keeping. Although looking at it, I understand why, because it's a very sturdy bag. These laminated.
It has survived all this time.
These Ziploc bags are definitely a lot more powerful than regular Ziploc bags, which is also why they're not recyclable, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a tree hugger Moroki coming out, telling people to not buy things with laminated plastic unless you intend to reuse them the way Peter has.
I wish I could say we were perfect about that, but so many things come in those bags is the problem.
It's true. It's true. Okay, away from blueberry bags,
Okay,
we're
the last
talking
quirk.
about the yes.
Okay, I was gonna show one more quirk about this. Because I'm gonna get out of the way, because I do want to talk about Lore Master's deck. But there's one sort of weird thing I wanted to point out if we have a sec to do that. Here, let me quickly go giant Eric to like that. So these are the conflicts, and they're literally just written on envelopes, one of which I stepped on. I don't know if you can see the footprint there. It's more visible to me in my light. But conflicts were originally called obstacles, and they actually weren't part of the deck. The original draft just had 4 card types. It had agents, aspects, anchors, and engines, and there was no like problem. Like to me, like I would try to write the conflicts so that the engines, so that a conflict was inherent to them, like there'd be an overcoming. It was part of the desire. And these were added later, and I didn't have any more colors, and I didn't have any more index cards, so I just grabbed a stack of like small greeting card envelopes that I had on hand and just like went with it. I just think it's very like whatever you have on hand when inspiration strikes, you just you turn that into the raw materials for your craft.
So you could have like tried to like spin something like more meaningful like that, where it's like, oh, you put the other cards inside that one, and then you have a reveal of your whole story as you go along. But that'd be something very different.
Ooh, yeah. I've had some thoughts for envelope-based decks in my daydreaming, but I think financially, I have a feeling they'd be like so expensive to print, we probably wouldn't get to do it. But that's a story for another live stream. I'm taking us down a side path longer than I intended.
I think it's actually smart that when you know what you say about like whatever you have in the moment, turn it into your work, because I can say that one of my biggest blockages and obstacles to completing my work or finding my ideas is that I'll usually have my idea in the most random of places, often in the shower, often when driving, both terrible times to record said idea. And I'm very I think I'm like very particular in how I record my things. It's always like it needs to be in my creative notebook, or else why would I have my creative notebook? And then it ends up never see like it, and then it ends up like, you know, vanishing from my brain space and memory later on, and then like I don't have that idea anymore. So I think what you say is sound, at least for anyone who's also creative out there and maybe be a little bit forgetful like myself. So a useful piece of advice.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And when we get into the notebook stuff, I'll share a little sort of reflection that I ended up with about like I'm just really glad that I kept it, that I kept that note, because it's what eventually turned into the Lore Masters deck. But yeah, like work the materials you have on hand and then keep everything, like hang on to it, because at some point you'll stumble through that notebook and you may be at a new point in your life where the context clicks differently and there's something you can do with it. So yeah, that's very good advice.
I have successfully solved, I think, the Facebook streaming.
Brilliant.
Yay.
Hey, we're extra live then. We're double live.
We're extra live. We're extra live, and yeah.
We're liver.
So I guess I know Peter, you know, before we got went live, we in all our organized form, mostly you in all your organized form, created a lovely outline for us. But I wonder if we want to go ahead like with talking, sharing a little bit of some of the questions that were sent to us, whether we want to kind of walk through like let's look at, you know what, let's quickly, before we dive into questions, keep your questions coming in. I definitely am seeing things come in already, which I'm assuming Eric has taken as keeping track of. But maybe Peter, like, walk people through that timeline of Lore Masters deck.
Awesome. Yeah,
I know I might even take it a little bit further back and mention that, you know, when we were originally thinking of our next crowdfunding campaign, it wasn't even going to be Lore Masters.
No,
it was something completely different. In fact, I think we went as so far as to creating a landing page for said item and then doing a hard pivot.
Yeah. So that was the workshop deck, which I actually might have the notebook for it around here somewhere, which is still in the works, still in my notes. But yeah, so it started off where the next project was going to be something called Workshop Deck, where it's a deck designed to kind of give the effect of being in a writing workshop, but on your own. So it's a way to like focus on a particular skill as you're rewriting a scene, or prompts for creating a scene with a focus on like when you're writing this version of the scene, I really want you to focus on all of your dialogue tags being tied to action in the settings. Whenever someone says something, what are they interacting with? How can we remind people of where the scene is set? And you're going to do like a 5-minute writing exercise where you practice like grounded dialogue, is what I'd call it, or setting based dialogue. And it makes your dialogue a bit more dynamic. And you can like build that skill and track that you worked on that skill. And then in the next exercise, you might be doing a tune-up exercise where you're editing your work in progress and you're going to revisit a scene for like, how can I go back to this scene and really raise the stakes or make the stakes clearer? And it gives you a chance to revise a scene with a particular angle in mind to improve yourself. And there were some other decks for helping sort of brainstorm or structure a larger form story, and then another deck for doing reflection activities on your creative process, what's working, where you're stumbling, and how to make improvements. So it's meant to be kind of like almost like a little writing workshop you take home. Still working on it, still love that idea. But when we got approached by BackerKit about bringing our next project exclusive to the platform, you and I had some really interesting conversations about like BackerKit. They do a variety of things, but they do tabletop stuff so well. Like there are so many cool tabletop folks creating content there, and a lot of the backers are like really experienced tabletop people. This deck that I was working on is a lot more designed for like writers and novelists. And I remember, Murky, you talking about like there's some wisdom in recognizing like we're going to have a ton of backers coming in. They're also like we're going to be doing these collaborative live streams. We knew that we wanted to do a lot more engagement with backers. If we did a tabletop based project, we would have a chance to like solicit the opinions from like the most active tabletop crowdfunding community on the internet. We would have a chance to also build on like Deck of Worlds. We were getting a lot of that feedback coming in late 2022, early 2023, and there's so much excitement for these like world building tools for tabletop that like doing a hard pivot into the direction, well, like was fun for me because had my brain turned on to a different problem solving. I think we realized like this is a really cool opportunity, something new in tabletop, to really work with like the expertise of the backers in that community and with the expertise that's like relevant to BackerKit. You know, let's see what we've got in the like our sort of box of ideas for creative work that would fit there, and that's sort of how the pivot happened. Because actually, I'm going to pull up the presentation here.
I actually remember when Peter first suggested a pivot. The person in me who doesn't like changing direction with people or worried that we might spread ourselves too thin with different projects was very resistant to the idea. And it's funny, we're probably going to dig into this when we kind of talk about Peter's like boiling points or cool down points, but I think I definitely had a moment where I was like, I think that sometimes I feel like in the creative world, I have what people call like the unfun part of the job, which I guess like isn't that for me. Like I've been, I was a producer in theater and film for a long time, and I'm wired to have a bit of an engineer brain, and I'm very like meticulous, and I think you need all of that in all the different areas, right? Like in a theater show or in a festival, you can't just have people being pure artists. You need someone to manage the budget. You need someone who's going to talk technical terms with technicians. You need someone to talk with all the fun bureaucratic folks about all your permits and stuff like that. And I think the same applies to crowdfunding. And I had to kind of be like, this sounds fun, Peter. Let me check your enthusiasm for a moment, and let's talk about the viability of kind of making a pivot. How far down the rabbit hole have we already gone down? Workshop deck, is this going to be a lot of work to make a change, et cetera, et cetera? I think inherently we did end up making a big decision and a good decision. There was moments where obviously like I had to trust you, Peter, and your expertise, and this is something like knowing that you've run the campaigns that you have and that you were having these conversations with BackerKit. For those of you who don't know, like I joined on as CEO fairly recently. I joined last June. Even though I've worked with Peter on the story engine and Deck of Worlds as a consultant for about 3 years, but obviously like in a much larger capacity, which meant that now I'm really diving into the fold with him, and I kind of said, I'm going to trust your expertise on this, and like if you think that this is going to be the space that we're going to better participate in, let's do it. You know?
Yeah, and there's definitely trust both ways there, because I remember, and actually I have I couldn't find, I don't think you wrote them down. You gave me oral notes the first time that I pitched this as a pivot, but even the way you structured the pitch, I remember was like, okay, don't go too deep down the rabbit hole. Give me a sense of like what you'd be thinking about with the pivot. And I have I summarized what I remember the feedback being from that session, and something I didn't write down because I didn't write it down because it didn't summarize well. But I remember you said like, keep working on this. I can tell you're excited. I can tell that there is something here, but here's what I would need to see to know that this is actually a new project and not just a new direction where there might be a project. But the other thing you said was, I also don't think I can stop you. Like, you're so excited. I know you're going to be thinking about this anyway. Like, I know that you're like, I can tell that your brain's going to keep working on it, whether or not my focus is somewhere else, my brain's going to be there. And I think you acknowledged that if we could make the opportunity line up with where the excitement was, we could make that work. But I'm getting ahead of myself because the feedback bits I want to get to. One thing I did want to show, I'm busting out the camera one more time before I put it away, because I don't have this in my slideshow pictures here. I did find the workshop deck booklet notebook. It's literally the same one as the Lore Masters deck. It was called Maker's Path when I first started working on it. I forgot, I double side on my notebook so that I can quickly find the section where I want to dump notes. But Maker's Path had a lot of it was on the computer, but some of it was making it to sort of the raw notes. So yeah, it's still under development, but currently not, or like it's paused in development, I guess I'd say. It's one of the things that we've considered for future stuff. But before, at the same time, what Lore Masters Deck grew out of, and where I was sort of pitching you, is basically something out of my old notebook. So I'm going to pull that up. We're going to take this away and add this, and I'm going to full screen this. Okay. So this is my random notes book. This is where I write down. Oh, actually, and I'm going to quickly adjust this because Maroki, your face is just the Lore Masters.
I'm just the live. Hold on.
I'm confused because my cursor is showing up twice because it shows up as part of the screen share. Give me a minute here. Okay. All right, Maroki's back. Yeah, so this is my random notes booklet. This is where like everything gets written down. So like when I have an idea for a short story or a TikTok or like a set of expansions, I'll dump it here unless I have a dedicated notebook that's sort of like meant to hold that stuff. And this is something that I tend to have in a bag with me when I leave the house. So if I'm ever not going to be home, I usually have either this or some kind of active notebook. I have a few of these basically, like random notes. This is the one that this one happened to end up in, but I have like 3 other notebooks that might be the random notebook that I'm carrying around at any given time. And let me see if it's, how do I advance this? There we go. And this is just an example of like one of the ways I was able to date these entries by hand, because I don't date them normally, was this is a script that I wrote for a TikTok video that got so muddy and wet because I took the notebook out in the rain to record it. And I was able to figure out, okay, this must be from after, because the ink hadn't run, which means that this note came before the other note because the rain happened, and then the notes got written on those pages that had already dried. So this is a script from a TikTok that I recorded going to look for a World War II plane crash in the kind of like mountainous hill area outside of Port Hardy in the north tip of Vancouver Island. And this is how I figured out how old this note was this is from the end of March 2022. And the next sort of thing that happened, oh yeah, so this is the notebook you can see in the bottom left there out in the rain as I'm trying to present it. And there's like rain falling on the inside of the notebook, ruining all my notes.
I can literally see like the content creator brain being like, I am wet and muddy and life sucks and I want to be inside, but I think I should capture a video of this moment because I think this is an important like recording, a way to document my process. I have gone through things like this as well, so like, I am so uncomfortable, but I also think this is an important documentation. How do I do this without destroying my camera?
I don't know now. I don't know how, but it's going to be useful later, and if it's not, I'll find a way.
Actually, you'll notice that like the early section of the timeline here is all pictures of notebooks that I have. The pictures were taken in the last like week or two. All of the stuff, once Maroki gets involved in the project, there's actually pictures because she reminded me to document it. She was the one who's like, get a photo of this, get a photo of the prototype in action. So like, I don't have the paper deck anymore, but I have lots of photos of using it because Maroki was the one who reminded me like, hang on to this. We want to remember the process. We want to be able to look at what the growth looked like. We hadn't planned to do anything with it. Like the idea was like, maybe I'd send some of these pictures to Eric and Eric would post them on social media. But for the most part, it was just like, get it down so that you've got it. The other thing that helped me
I'm-
date this entry was these are they're literally on the next page from my notes on the physical print sample from Deck of Worlds. So the print sample had come in from the factory. I was making my notes on what needed to be double checked and what needed to change, that's the other time I was able to like date it pretty precisely.
I'm pretty sure it was a picture of like a timeline that you took, that you wrote down for yourself for Story Engine, that I was able to use to do a work back schedule for Deck of Worlds and eventually for Lore Masters decks. So
Oh, I know the paper you're talking about. Yeah, it was literally written on scrap paper, and I just had written down the actual intervals between every milestone because you'd do like, I would like to know this so we can plan Deck of Worlds, and I just scribbled down on hand like it was 3 weeks between the cargo getting to the port and the cargo being released from the port. So that's how long it just sat there, which is something you can forget to accommodate the timeline. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
yeah. So I don't want to keep deviating because I know this is like always us. We like explode into a live and then we have like 8,000 ideas and then the tangential ideas. And of course, as I'm reading the comments and questions that are coming in, I'm like, look at all these cool questions that I want to answer as well. So to kind of bring it all back to the notebook, like, I don't know if you want to share some of the really big lessons that you learn while crafting through this workbook and coming for what eventually manifests itself in the Lore Masters deck.
Yeah, so one more quick story here about kind of, and this is the first instance of the Lore Masters deck, is what I'm gonna say. This is where the timeline actually starts. So I'm dating this to like probably April of 2022. This was a brainstorm that I did. I was playing a game of Oceans, which is a board game where you sort of like come up with your own ocean ecosystem with my friend Aaron. And there's a bunch of different adaptations that you add to your creatures. And I had been wanting to do a deck where you create creatures. That was like an idea that I'd had that I was really interested in. And I remember like after the game stopping him and being like, "Can we do some brainstorming?" And I like jotted down ecosystems and adaptations. So it was gonna be an expansion for Deck of Worlds, maybe an expansion where like there's no card types in common, but it fills in something specific as a function for Deck of Worlds, which is like creating cool creatures with like custom things. And I was doing a lot of learning about like evolutionary biology and stuff like that at the time. So we jotted down all these different ideas and notes for things, and I kept doing it after we'd finished up. So I went back to this later, and there was another page of these too, which I'll flip to in a sec. But I'm gonna highlight two things here where like this is not the Lore Masters deck. This is like a weird one-off expansion, but there are two things here that kind of turned into the Lore Masters deck. One was the section that you can see. Oh, I think I can point here. Yeah. This says utility in my terrible serial killer handwriting. This says utility. And this was an idea that like one of the aspects that'd be interesting about the animal biology is like in what ways are these animals perhaps useful to people? Um, so here's an example of like good guard animals or easy to tame. They're loyal pets. They're able to detect a valuable substance. Their body part is part of a delicacy. Utility is kind of what started helping me realize that well, this is like one card type, but this deck is gonna be so much more interesting if like who uses them for this. Maybe a faction does. This was like the early version of the link queues. The idea that you could have one card type and you create it in isolation, but then it reaches out to other card types through relationships that happen through like links and lore. So how the creature is used by a particular faction, or like the way they adapted to a particular location and an ecosystem there. The other thing was connection. Connection was the section right here where, and some of these cues like hive minded is straight up in the final deck. That didn't change. That word made it all the way through every version of this every iteration of this draft. But connection was like sort of what is the social behavior of these creatures, which also included the relationships with humans and included the ideas that this category was going to cover a bunch of stuff, including like relationships and social behaviors that could connect them to humans and other link things. So this is all this was at this time. I captured the note. I really liked it, and the sort of creative lesson that I learned from this was I wrote them down. There's three things that I think are interesting here that are like good creative lessons that I would encourage every creator to keep in mind. So one is pay attention to what excites you. Like this is gonna be a recurring theme, is like Moroki managing my excitement and making sure that it's actually directed towards like furthering the project. But notice what excites you, because there's a reason that particular topic is like setting off neurons and getting your heart rate up, and like you can see in yourself what excitement feels like and looks like. And when that happens about a creative project, like pay attention. It matters to you for a reason, and there's probably something about the topic that is exciting to other people. So like just pay attention to that, honor that excitement. Like if I hadn't noticed how exciting this was and roped Aaron into it, we wouldn't have these notes that turned into the deck. Second thing is like write down your ideas and revisit them, and this includes your bad ideas. so much of what's in my notebooks is garbage that I never go back to. But the way I think about it is, it's like it's pulling out all of the raw material, all of the ore from the earth, and then later on, when you want to refine, you go back and like it's kind of like panning for gold. You're not going to find the good ideas. You're not going to find the gold without digging up all the bad ideas and scrubbing them off and seeing what's underneath them. But pay attention to the excitement. Pay attention to what's glimmering in your pile of ore. But that's how you get gold, is by like just working with a lot of ideas and being willing to write all of them down, collect all of them, and go back to them. And then the last one, and this is going to be such a recurring theme through the whole sort of timeline talk here, is talk your ideas through with different people. All of the major inflection points in this project came from like talking to Maroki about how is this deck going to feel different and fill a different niche in our deck systems than Story Engine and Deck of Worlds. Talking to Eric about like, okay, well, if we're trying not to repeat words from other decks or words in this deck, how are we going to expand our sense of faction to be able to include a broader set of words? Because that's where I was struggling for synonyms. So like all of the best breakthroughs happen through talking to other people. So those are like three things that when I look at this sort of note section, I really think is how we got from like an improvised brainstorm that I roped a front into after a board game into the finished product. This was me spilling over, and actually you can see the word credit Aaron here. He's actually in the guidebook with a thank you in the bottom of the guidebook section. When you get that on beta release day, you can look for him in the credits there. This was the spillover, so I was just recording as many notes as I could. I didn't know what I was going to do with them yet, but like capture the raw material while it's exciting, kind of like with the story engine prototype that I showed you. Like work with the materials you got on hand. If what you have on hand is a receipt, write things down on the paper receipt you've got with you. You can go back to it later. So yeah, so that was here. The next iteration of this happened because I was actually working on my home D&D campaign. I won't go into this in detail, but basically I wanted to come up with custom creatures. I like doing custom creatures for D&D. This was the little home setting that I was working on. So I like, oh, I had that idea for the creatures deck. I had dusted it off, and basically I took that list of words I had, I put it into a spreadsheet, and I spat it into InDesign through a data merge. Realized that all I had were creature traits, so I would need some creature types. So I wrote up a bunch of different body plans for creatures, put those into a spreadsheet, dumped them, and I ended up with, this is like my little home prototype. I just printed this off on cheap paper. You can tell that it's a home prototype because I didn't bother changing the card backs. I just literally took the Deck of Worlds print and play. So the backs still showed region and landmark cards because I'm like, I'm not going to design new card backs. This is just for me. That's how quick and dirty this copy was. It took me like an hour and a half, 2 hours maybe to throw together. And I ended up coming up with like two creatures for my homeworld. One was like a stinky squid. It was like a mix between a skunk and a squid that had like really just rancid ink. And the other one was this big, like 8 foot tall, but like spherically shaped owl called a fleecy down raptor. It's just this big, soft bird that's mad all the time but doesn't really move. Very much like a couch potato bird that has just the softest feathers in the world. And I had a lot of fun with the deck. I liked it. Again, I was paying attention to, this is fun, this is exciting. But the thing that I realized wasn't coming out yet was like, as a deck on its own, these creatures didn't feel tied into their environment. Those lore links were missing. I didn't know that's what it was at the time, but I knew that like, I want these to feel more tied into the settings somehow. I want them to be more linked into the lore. But one thing that I think was a big breakthrough in this deck is that those card types I just showed you, that's the first iteration of primary queues and secondary queues. So Lore Master's deck is powered by, you draw a primary queue, like you create a faction type, and then you apply these different modifiers to it. So you describe it in different ways. This faction has a really military discipline structure, and it also has a background where they are the ones who created this powerful artifact, and also they're currently having an agenda where they're trying to hunt down a traitorous member. Like that whole system came about because I realized like, oh, you start with a core prompt and then you put little satellites on it. And this is basically where the idea was when I brought it to Maroki. That's all I had. I kind of this is like what I prepared for my first pitch to Maroki, and I'll get her to sort of explain her first impressions of it. But what I did is I revisited my old notebooks. I found those notes, and like I know it's gonna have something to do with the ecosystems and adaptations expansion. What if like I had an idea for a factions expansion, I had an idea for an events expansion based around like cataclysms for the world and world breaking. Maybe the thing that we do instead of the workshop deck is what if I brought you these 5 unrelated expansions that are all connected in the idea that like they're different parts of creating lore, and it kind of fills in some of the things that Deck of Worlds doesn't do. What do you think of that? Yeah, Maroki, do you want to sort of explain your first impressions when I came in with that idea?
I think I gave it away a little bit earlier on when I sort of mentioned, I guess like I was a little bit taken aback, and I think like the really long and short that I came back was that I need to see more to kind of prove that it was a proof of concept that was viable to our audience. And the truth of the matter is that I knew that that even the version, like even a more complete version of what you showed me, was not going to be quite where we would be at by the time we were launched, right? But when we first discussed pivoting this, it was so early on. Before the launch, I knew I'd be making a call on basically the premise of an idea, and in it reminded me a lot of when I worked in the startup world, when people come and pitch an idea at you and say, "This is the idea I have. What do you think? You should fund me and give me money to go do the project." And we were so far in advance of proof of concept that I think I worked really hard at kind of pushing you to expand on the idea and make it a pitch, make it complete, make it unique. Like, I know one of the big things I said is how is this not something that could not be necessarily solved by expansions alone on Story Engine Deck or Deck of Worlds? Like, why is this so different that someone who has chosen to buy Story Engine Deck or Deck of Worlds would like to buy because it's unique? What it makes it so special that someone who's a new buyer who could use it, because all our decks can be used independently, why would they also choose to buy this deck and not choose to buy one of our other decks as a result? And I think like trying to make it stand on its own was like important to me. And I know one of the ideas that we threw around, and I think you and I butted heads at actually quite extensively, was whether we wanted to have expansions for this deck or not. Especially as you increased the number of cards that were going to be in Lore Master's deck, which is, the most types of cards that we've ever had, the most cards we've ever had, where, these cards are double-sided. I thought it would be interesting to create something that was a standalone system. No expansions, it's complete as is. And then at some point later on, you came back and said, I think at that point it was just deities, but you were like, deities do not fit. Like they will not fit in this deck. They have to be an expansion. We must have an expansion of the deities. They do not fit. And then I also, of which my response is, well, it can't be just one expansion in that case. And yeah, there was a lot of like little things that we wanted to make sure that, whether it is uniqueness, completeness, and then like as flushed out of a proof of concept as possible, so that when we came to the table to all of you guys, all of you who are watching us, who are either our backers or have been curious about the project for a while, that it was worth looking at and worth kind of staking yourselves and your dollars on, right? It's actually interesting. There was a question I saw earlier that actually is a good kind of follow-up. Ryan asked, what was the thing you wanted to include but just couldn't make it work? And I feel like that's actually as good of a tie-in as any, that question.
Yeah, so within the deck, there were various things that like were going to be part of the core deck and just didn't. Like in the end, I had to accept they didn't work. One was I wanted to see if there's a way to work the emblems into the core functions of the deck, and every single time I tried to model a way to do it, it was like distracting from the core functions, and it made the overall deck worse unless the thing you were trying to do was like build a ton of emblems all the time. So there still are emblem based cues in the main deck, but they're not just structured as visual emblems. They're structured as like a prompt to you thinking about what they might be using as a flag or a banner. So yeah, emblems. In fact, basically the 3 lore mastery expansions are the 3 things that I couldn't make work. Where like to embed them in the deck was too hard. Deities, originally I was trying to make the figures deck also be deities at the same time, like to do both. And I had one of the cues per card would be kind of designed to work as a deity, but it meant that rather than having a good choice of deities when you made a deity, you had like 1 good choice and 3 bad choices because you were trying to just use a card that's meant to be normal people. Yeah, so that's.
And did you have what are other ideas that didn't even make into the final iteration of the deck? Or expansions?
The fifth one in the list here. So this is a list of at the time it was going to be 5 decks: factions and figureheads, which would be basically turned into the factions deck; evolutions and adaptations, which was going to be an ecology expansion, but was really just mostly my creatures thing; chimeras and constructs is going to be a magical version of the creatures deck. So I was going to separate out like an evolutionary biology take from a magical take. We combined those in the creatures deck. Calamities and cataclysms turned into the events deck, and the way that you can use the events to like smash your world apart if you want to. But this one, the fifth one, secrets and shadows, or secrets and songs, or secrets and sagas, which was I had a bunch of different names that I'd scribbled down. It was the deep lore expansion, and I think what I had in mind for this, some of it is captured in the events decks for sure, and a lot of it's captured in the background cues that are distributed across the card types. But I think it was going to be like I want to have like little seeds for like an unanswered question in your world that like say the players could investigate in your tabletop RPG, or that the characters in your novel might try and solve. And so it might be that like no one knows what happened to the founder of this region. And these were going to just be a card type on their own, so you would just draw them as like almost like a little flashcard. We still have cues that work a lot like that tug at the sense of mystery and the unknown, but they're distributed across the deck. But a dedicated set of prompts for that would be kind of fun. Like, it's still a thing. It's still an idea that like I want to chew on. But it wouldn't have fit with the way the Lore Masters deck worked out. It is like clockwork. Like, everything fits into everything, and this would have stuck out in a way that I think would have been unhelpful.
I think probably as a side note to that, Eric, I might throw to you, because I know during the editing and proofing process, there became a time when two similar words were similar but different, but there just wasn't space to hold for it. And there were definitely, like, I think, moments of debate on whether certain words that, let's say, like Peter loved, you pushed for excluding. And maybe we can, maybe this is an opportunity, Eric and Peter, for you guys to bid a fond farewell to some of the cues and words that eventually had to be killed your darlings, I guess, so to say. Darlings that were killed.
We could also resolve it to the 2-hour debate we had on if archive or museum is more important to include in location.
Oh my god.
We're gonna state our case, and the chat can vote.
Yeah, use the chat, archive or museum. Okay, maybe before we tell people what we actually ended up deciding, because sorry, despite asking for a vote, the decision has been made. But now that the decision has been made, we'd still be curious to know in the audience what you guys think.
It's definitely high risk now. It's like, oh no, what if one of us was wrong? We have to basically like be shamed in front of it here and everybody.
Well, actually, here's the thing. We're not going to reveal which one was chosen. You'll find out when we release the beta on the 8th. And you can pull this conversation back up and give your input. I do want the votes in the chat, but I liked museum. I think because like archive doesn't necessarily feel public, so it doesn't feel like people might have access to it. I like the idea that a museum, like, people aren't supposed to wander in, so it's a way of like accessing parts of the past and parts.
Are you trying to win votes?
He's absolutely trying.
Eric, what was your why were you suggesting archive?
My argument for archive is that, like, as cool as a museum is, it fits less. It doesn't fit as well in as many settings because it's sort of a modern construct. The idea that there's a place that's open to the general public, to all the plebs that like can go and see these great works of art, like, all that used to be kind of walled behind, castles and very expensive things. So basically museum just felt much more modern in a way that wasn't always going to fit in a wide variety of settings, whereas archive was a more general term that could apply to a museum, but could also be a library or just like a storehouse of like a material that for crossing a bunch of different types of cards, archive was the one that had more utility.
Yeah. So yeah,
so far
the chat seems to be going heavy towards archive.
Well,
hold to find out how we made the decision at the end.
Yeah. Hold archive. Hold your votes deep into your chest, folks, and also share it here. We'll remember and we'll make sure we call it out on the 8th on during next live stream. And speaking of the next live stream, if you guys go on our YouTube and on Facebook, I want to say, but predominantly on YouTube, it looks like most of you folks like joining us from YouTube. But if you actually go on the Backer Kit crowdfunding page when we go live, we actually do pop up there too. So if you guys like hanging out in the Backer Kit community, our lives actually do crop up there now as well. But on YouTube, we actually have the event already set up for the 8th. So if you guys need a reminder, if you're like me who basically looks at my calendar every day or a week in advance, just being like, what's coming up, you can always turn on the notify me or the little like bell button to kind of let you know when we're going live next week for the beta. This is maybe when it comes to including items and yeah, I think this follows Fellowship of the Tables had this question that is, I think, like a good tie into also things about whether we choose to include in the deck or things are, if not now for the future, but they asked, like, you've mentioned a few times that you have no plans for expansion packs for Lore Master's deck. That because we haven't gotten to it yet, or do you not ever expect to release expansion packs? It's a pretty loaded question.
Yeah, I think at this time, I would say we don't intend to release expansion packs. I really feel like we got it all out in the main deck and in the limited set of Lore Master expansions. Like we really put everything into like justifying every single word that showed up in those final decks. Things like that sort of lore seed secrets thing that I was talking about. If we ever did something like that, I don't think it would be an expansion so much as a standalone set of flashcards. A little bit like maybe like the culture keyholes. Culture keyholes even is more like tied into how the operations, like the physical way that you bring together cards for the deck of worlds, but they work really well as just flashcards. And I think we would do something like that if we did anything. But I don't like. There's no card types that we missed. There's no functions that I'm like, I wish we'd gotten that in there. No lingering regrets for like missed opportunities. Like I really think with all of the iterations that we did, we nailed the brief. Like we got there in the end. And there were so many rounds of feedback to get there, and like that included backer feedback, that included sensitivity reader feedback, that included some of the design iterations that at some point I'll show you pictures of. But yeah, it was. I think we nailed it. That's my answer anyway.
I think given that I don't know if you want to stop sharing your screen for a moment just so we don't lose Eric's face, but I think like
my face isn't that important.
given my particular inclination from the get-go to really want Lore Master's deck to be its own piece, it's the idea that's like the treasure trove is the treasure trove, and it's funny because we've even structured the way a lot of our deck boxes have been to literally be a treasure box.
Yeah.
That's the treasure, and I don't necessarily want maybe it's the completionist in me, and I think it's like in the creative world sometimes there's that question of when does it end, right? Like when do you decide your play is finished and it should be on stage? When do you think your book is published and entered into the world? And in some ways Story Engine deck and Deck of Worlds has a lot of like is limitless in the opportunities that we have to take it, which is why we still have expansions that we're still thinking of in the works and all of that good stuff. And I think maybe Lore Master's deck was like a bit of a reflection of the creator who like wants something that is full and complete for once. It's like it's like it comes with a lot more conciseness, and frankly, because of the level of intricacy that Lore Master's deck has, right? Like these aren't just single word prompts. These aren't just single region prompts. In some ways, just by its nature of how you can create endless clusters and endless qualifications, short of running out of cards, you have almost an infinite level of possibilities with just the Lore Master's deck. Like I challenge someone to run out of ideas. This is my challenge to all of you to exhaust the possibilities of Lore Master's deck. And if you truly find it redundant at some point, then come back and say like, you know what, you've hit your limit. Story Engine deck in its core at its core core is 180 cards, 12 billion writing possibilities. 12 billion. I challenge you to get to 12 billion. I actually remember a picture book a long time ago about counting stars and 12 billion, and I basically showed like the little kid turning into an old man and like ended up in a gravestone because you can't actually count that many numbers in your lifetime physically. So that's just Story Engine deck, and that's putting like 5 cards together. Lore Master's deck, you can create as many lore clusters as you want. You can qualify them for as much as you want. So, yeah. Not to say that, like, you know, this, like, I'm not saying this to in hopefully I'm not coming off as like antagonizing, being like, oh, I challenge you to do the thing, but I truly do, because I think like you'll find yourselves surprised by the number of possibilities you will discover when starting to mess about with the Lore Masters deck. If you didn't participate in our closed beta, where you know, I know some people actually printed their versions of the closed beta to play with. When you have the open beta, like, challenge it, play with it, dig into it, expand on it, and see what you can come up with.
Yeah, literally the math for how to model the number of potential combinations. I have a calculator. I just was I off my head, I've been saying 12 billion and telling people that. I went back to the actual calculator I built as a spreadsheet for iterations. Main deck is actually 30 billion. I've been remembering that number wrong. 30 billion, and that's just of the story seed prompt, just the core story seed prompt. So in Lore Masters, like, I literally don't know how to do the math, but it's in like the Googleplexes. Like, it's the number of potential combinations you have because of the double siding, because you can layer in different ways and also link in different ways. Like, it is, the recombinability is preposterously complex. So yeah, it's so thorough, it's good. So I don't think we're going to do a ton of expansions, but let me really quickly, I'm going to quickly blow through just some quick notes on like what the rest of the design looks like, because things do speed up here. And Murky, you mentioned kind of the boiling reducing period. This was a section where a time period where I would go and sort of boil the pot of the project. So I would like add energy and excitement and attention to it. I would add features that would sort of heat up and expand. So this is new features, new things that I'm going to try. And then we would do a reducing period where you would go back and ask some questions about like, is that working? Or and we would reduce again. So we'd concentrate on the things that were working. We would like focus down on like, what's the core thing. And I remember it was the next iteration where actually I'm going to share the screen again, and we'll go through this quickly because I want to get to the questions, and we'll actually get to answer some of the questions through the pictures here. But so this was me coming up with what would eventually become the main card types. You can see Figurehead was the figures deck, and I was trying to make deities work as a subsection of it, and I couldn't make it work. And Faction was there, but this is very close to what our final card list ends up being. So through you helping me boil, reduce, we got to what we felt were the essential card types. We realized it was going to have to be double-sided. If we were going to have secondary queues and primary queues and have 8 card types, we'd be looking at like a 600 card deck. It'd be really expensive to produce. It'd be a very, very high price point for backers. We wanted this to be something that felt as like easy to pick up and portable as our other card types. And also, like, we just didn't want to have 16 card types, right? Like, that's a lot of card types. By being able to make the cards do double duty, we actually sort of made the on-ramp to understanding and learning to use the deck a little bit easier. So this was the first me trying to draw like, what are the cards going to look like physically. And then we get the first paper prototype. And this is like fairly close to what you can draw a line between everything in this prototype and what you end up with for the final deck. These weren't double-sided yet, but actually, yeah, you can see this the same notebook page there on the desk. So we went from here to me starting to rapidly write out as many queue ideas as I could for the different card types. This bit, I'm actually working at the Moncton Public Library here. The color coding was me trying to make sure that every card type had certain balances of, like, I was trying to make factions also work as locations at this time. So every faction might also be a stronghold. So I needed to have a word in every card that worked as both. That was an idea that I eventually abandoned. Started to build printable prototypes using like a rapid sort of prototype export system that I created, where you could put everything into a spreadsheet, merge it into InDesign, and print it out. So this is where I'm producing what's close to the first copy that I'm going to physically show Maroki, because we end up getting to meet up in Toronto for an in-person session, because we don't live in the same city. So our in-person collaborations, this is the first time that I built an actual lore web with it on paper. But this is the first picture from me pitching it to you. And I remember that I did a very bad job on my first pitch. I was so excited, and I was so excited about all these different like advanced functions that I did
It gave me like advanced mode when I was coming in at like beginner mode.
And I remember like you stopped me, you're like, okay, we'll start it again and like show me the core concept first. So you helped me refine the pitch. You also really helped me realize that this is our most complex deck. So from a learning perspective, like we need the first queue, the first cluster you make to be like simple enough that that you can explain it as you do it. And then we'll layer in, okay, what do you need to know about links and complex bits? So you really helped, I remember, reshape the learning curve for the deck to make sure that it'd be a lot more intuitive for people to pick up. This is also,
I think like I'm good. Yeah, I'll take a moment to interrupt you here. I think like the other thing is when you have a creative prompt deck, like the way all of our decks are, Story Engine, Deck of Worlds, and Lore Masters deck, I know one of the things that we don't like to do is feel like that there's a right or wrong way to use the deck. And I know that's actually a question we get from people a lot. It's like, well, what if you draw a card that you don't like, right? And I think people feel like if they put it back, that I don't know, that they're doing something wrong. And inherently, if it really doesn't resonate with you, absolutely. It's meant to foster your creative process as opposed to constrain your creative process. I know we've suggested in the past that if you draw a card that you don't like, that you might want to challenge yourself by using it anyways, because maybe if you have an idea that is disparate from what you think, you might open your mind up to, and your stories up to new possibilities. So even as an exercise, try using the cards you don't like. And then if it still doesn't connect with you, then draw something you like. But we have so many ways of using it. And of course, if for those of you who've owned the Story Engine deck and have read the guidebook, this is something I even learned about the guidebook. Our guidebook is truly a guidebook. It's not like a rule book, just read it and put it away. The guidebook, as you get into the latter pages of both Story Engine deck, Deck of Worlds, and eventually Lore Masters deck, we actually show you alternative ways of using the product. So it's like, here's the core way. Now let's try swapping out agent cards with object cards. Now let's try swapping that out with more agent cards. Let's change the direction of how you want to build your prompts. So there's many different ways, which I think in the moment of Peter showing me Lore Master's deck, he was like, here's the way, but let me immediately show you all these other ways, of which, as someone who was experiencing the deck for the first time, it was like, I don't know what just happened. I got so much creativity in one get-go. It was almost as if someone took a bunch of paint and threw it at me and said, "A painting!" And I went,
Yeah. I'm thinking about one more very quick side tangent. Last night, Maruki and I did a non-work related call where we were talking about. I was just going to give a download on what I've learned about using TikTok to promote a project, because I've used it not for Story Engine very much, but for other things. And I remember realizing I'm about to fire hose again. I just did like a 3-hour self crash course on specifically how TikTok's used for music, and I have my old notes that I went back to, and it was a classic. Like when I get very hooked onto a topic and I get excited, I can tell that I've reached the energy level where I'm just going to fire hose excitable information at someone. And I remember feeling it was a similar feeling to how I felt during that social call we did as during this first presentation, where I'm like, I want to tell you everything I want to tell you all at once, and I don't know how to stop. But you were very good at helping me refine the pitch. And then the other thing I like is if in the chat, let us know if you recognize where the token pieces come from, because these were not Lore Masters tokens. These were something I grabbed off the shelf at my parents' house that became the model for the Lore Masters tokens. But it was Maroki being like, it'd be really cool if there's a way we could map connections that aren't just next to each other on the deck. And it gave me a brainwave, and I ran and grabbed a board game off the shelf. Tell me in the chat if you recognize which board game these tokens are from in this picture. But yeah, this was the session where the two creative sessions where we really got the rule set nailed down a lot better, and where we got also the idea for the tokens. Those happened because you were an advocate for that as an extra tool. We realized that we wanted it in the core deck, so we put it. It was a high stretch goal because it's expensive to add these, but we really wanted every backer who's a physical copy to get this if they can. Yeah. Oh, and we have Settlers of Catan. That's the one. So literally, I grabbed Settlers of Catan off the shelf, and I realized, we have a corner token and we have a straight token. Perfect.
What I love, Peter, is as I'm reading these comments, people are already kind of sharing their various experiences with the deck, whether like choosing to exchange cards or not. Like Bronwyn here is saying that sometimes talk myself out of the idea of putting back a card I don't like because it's cheating. You know what, that honestly is kind of me too. Like I'm a very by the book kind of person. And then in contrast, sorry, so Eric, I'll let you have this thought in a second, but and then in contrast, we have Christina saying, I've gone digging through a card pile for a very specific prompt.
It's kind of like creative writing in general, though, where it's like you could kind of there's no rules about what proper grammar is, but it's a lot easier to break the rules in an efficient fashion if you know what the rules are first.
Yes, nailed it. Absolutely nailed it. Yeah. That's a really good way to put it. And then basically from here, it was just a few more iterations. This is me testing it out outside, which I found out that wind is a problem for that when you use paper models. So I had to weigh everything down with coins and cards. This was a different version of it where outlined the edges of cards so I could quickly tell from color which ones they were. All of our decks are designed to be able to print on black and white without color cues, and also to be friendly to colorblind users by having the icons be so prominent. And yeah, and then we kept iterating, and eventually this was the first alpha deck that we printed. I think this was like about a month before we launched the campaign because we knew we'd need to have photographs of the final thing. We'd had it designed up and we've been playtesting the design version, but this was when we had like a production copy that was not being printed on paper that looked really nice. And our factory sent us some examples of tokens that we could use that was a bit more to spec for us. And then we do our first live streams where we are getting to test it with you. And here's where we get into like what I really call the like big collaboration phase, because we collaborated with backers during the campaign to find out like which card types you're excited about, which cues you're interested in, like getting to get your live votes on which cues to use was like instant and instant feedback into like, do I have the, am I locked into my own way of thinking, or is someone else interested? Like the fact that I got outvoted on archive versus museum in the chat is like, if Eric and I could have just done that, we would have saved ourselves 2 hours of back and forth, and also we would have made a decision that you will find out what it is in a week. So it's all it's very interesting to me to have thought about how much value that added to our design process. We collaborated with our guest writers, 7 guest writers. So Jordan Shively, that's our Fikri, Betsy Aoki, AZ Louise, Brendan Alexi, Eric Weiss, our community manager. And then, did I miss anybody? Oh, I'll go back and check after. But
I know, the pressure of pulling up everyone's names like off the back of your head. Now, now, if we forget to name anyone, it's on our like main Lore Masters deck story page. You can see all our collaborators. So if we very foolishly forgot the name of anybody, you can get their full bios and their photos and all their lovely selves and access to reference links out or links. Yes.
Brandon Curley's the one that I missed. And everybody brought like just such different perspectives to the writing team. So we took the deck that we already had, the alpha, cut the weakest material, brought in all their best material, and really like punched up the cues. Like there's so much good material in there that they added since the alpha, which is what you guys all saw on the live stream. We collaborated with backers for the closed beta process. So you could sign up to get an early copy of the deck. And then we'd send you a beta feedback form that would structure the feedback that we were looking for at this stage. And also some sections just for open notes and how the deck was working. Like those notes were so helpful. I won't go into the details now because we already covered it extensively in an update, but 2 updates ago on our backer kit and also on our blog right now, it's the most recent portion of our blog, you'll find our dev notes from like everything that we changed from the high level that came out of that closed beta. Like all the lessons that we learned from backers in the closed beta were so valuable, and we go to those in detail. Also, tomorrow we're going to be doing a live stream with the backer kit team. We're joining them on their platform. You can find a link in the latest update. And we'll be talking a bit more about what backer collaboration looks like for us, both from the crowdfunding perspective and from the product development perspective. So we'll go more into those details there. But then after that, we would do feedback from and collaboration with the sensitivity readers. So people who are giving us notes on how to make the deck more inclusive, representative of a broader set of experiences, and representative of those experiences and backgrounds in a way that's like thoughtful and respectful. So that was a huge process. Yeah.
And on that note, we kind of do have a question from if I pronounce this correctly, Royalis. Was there anything meaningful behind the color palette that you chose in terms of accessibility? Were you just trying to be distinctive, or is there some other kind of accessibility or inclusiveness purpose behind it?
Yeah, so accessibility and inclusiveness was a huge emphasis. We had a huge emphasis on this in this deck because I know that one of the things that I love about the Story Engine deck of worlds is like the distressed and textured look is really beautiful, but you need to make sure that your contrast for fonts and your font size is big enough. The contrast between the foreground and background is big enough. So for this deck, we decided not to do illustrations. All of our other decks have some cards that are illustrated. We did no illustrations on the cards. Instead, we did high contrast, high visibility. We reduced the number of textures that we were using. We still included some really elements that I thought made the deck visually beautiful and engaging. I know every time I did an iteration, I'd show Maroki to get her input, and also on colors. So there's a huge emphasis on accessibility, on the print being large enough to read, on the contrast being strong enough, on the design elements not distracting from the core functionality. And you'll see like big icons, like those icons in the center are really big. We added also the card type in print underneath that for extra clarity and visibility. The colors themselves were not chosen out of like I know people have done designs where they look at the colorblind palette and pick colors that will be more easy to differentiate. We did not do that. We were working at needing to both work with our existing color choices from other decks for card types that were similar to each other. And we've questioned about that we're going to answer to that I'm excited to talk about, which is like the figures are so similar to the agents. We needed to be able to acknowledge that, but also differentiate them. So we were locked in on some choices. And also we now have like 16 card types between Story Engine, Deck of Worlds, and the expansions. We need to have colors that look different from those as well, just for clarity. So the color choices were trying to do something that looked a little bit brighter, a little bit more in like the soft like pastel range, but it still had really, really high contrast, really, really high visibility, and also that templated easily because this deck is so complicated, like essentially 16 card types, cues in different places, icons that are embedded in. Like every time we do a data export from our Google Sheet down to our CSV or TXT files into InDesign, into PNGs and PDFs, and then load those into a print and play file. We need to be able to have the templating be something that works very smoothly. So we also needed to be able to have that template work for all these different card types. Yeah, but that was sort of the different levels of considerations. And I really got to shout out Zach Schuster, our graphic designer here, who worked with me on so many iterations of this to get the colors right, colors that felt correct to the card type, that worked with our existing colorways. He was such an absolute boss at going through these revisions with me, and Maroki and Eric for rounds of feedback that they gave us too in this period.
I think like it was interesting when we came to the decision of the design of the cards, because I think you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think maybe there was like an inherent assumption that maybe there would be images this time, like there would still be imagery in Lore Master's deck. And there was like a lot of debate on what that would be, whether and texture. And I know texture was something you cared a lot about. A lot of, if you look at previous version of the deck, like the cards kind of had that parchment-y texture to it. And when we first realized the cards were going to be double-sided, and then of course on that, like on the back sides of the cards, I you know what, to this day I'm not really sure what's officially the front or the back side of the card, but you know, the side, like that one side of the cards is going to actually have substantially more text as well. How to make that work in context of the original, like the initial designs, texture and images. And I remember really pushing for stripping all of it. And I think like I had a feeling that you weren't in love with the idea of stripping all these things away from the cards, that perhaps they would end up looking too simple or not of value, or like it's like not reflective of who we are as Story Engine and Lore Masters deck. But I think, you know, one of the things that I you know what, I don't in the midst of all this conversation, I'm not sure if we missed it, but bringing in back that lore, like that Lore Masters pattern, you know, obviously that makes up our logo, and then juxtaposing it on the card, like that was an inspired. Yeah, that really did. Like I think originally, you know, when we were thinking like, oh no, we need to eliminate imagery, we're going to eliminate texture, these cards are just going to be so bland, which is, you know, the last thing we want lore to ever be, which is bland. And then putting in the kind of our quintessential like Lore Masters, like lore weaving pattern, I think really helped add an element of beauty and design that, you know, leveled up the cards a bit, but without kind of overwhelming and overstimulating the palette, so to say.
And it's I know that like one of the reasons I love that we've been calling it the flower in our like just internal design language when we talk about that element and needing to add it to something we're designing, as we talk about the flower. The flower visually is a metaphor for the way the deck works, right? Like you start with a seed and it blooms, and it literally goes out in the directions that those petals are pointing. So I love, like, it literally is pointing in the primary directions that your lore is going to expand in. It's pointing in the way that it's going to grow. There's something about that visually that's so beautiful, and that I think reduces the need for other design elements to characterize the deck. And it was like, I remember you mentioned that the minute where when you really signed on to like, okay, I think this project is ready for prime time, was when we talked about the link queues for the first time. You're like, that is so different from Story Engine, so different from Deck of Worlds. Like that makes this feel like its own thing. And you were the one who said like, I think that's where you keep digging. I think that's where the mother load's going to be for making this deck work.
And I think we touched on it sort of, mostly in the fact sense that like clearly I think there was like a need in to as we were realizing we probably had more cards than we could ever have, or ways to describe cards more than we ever had. There was a question that came in from Royce via email.
Yeah, I'll put that up on the screen.
Yeah, if you want to put that up, or Eric, you want to put that up. They were curious about the choice to make the cards double, like they almost like back-to-back question here. It's like making the cards double-sided, and then in card types overlapping with card types from previous sets like agents and figures, you know, traits, modifiers, and obviously I think that's a tie-in to our bridge expansion as well. But I think, yeah, very like the overlapping bit, and double-sidedness. I think double-sidedness was I think really answers itself. Like we just had a lot of lore.
So many cards.
We had a lot of lore, and then variations of it, right? Like the single, like the single side kind of being like in something that was indicative of an agent or figure or faction, but then the backside kind of being a qualifier for them. And we realized at some point that how do you describe it? It's like at some point you have to realize that those things could function on their own, and then the qualifiers could function independently, but they could, you know, cross-pollinate into each other. But if you put it all on the same side, they become a singular item.
Yeah, and I tried a version of the deck where like on one side there would be 2 primary queues and 2 secondary queues. Didn't work. There just wasn't enough selection matching options. Like you needed 4 and 4. There was a version of the deck where I tried to have all of the modifiers were universal cards. So one card would have 4 modifiers, and they might modify a faction or a location. And I had like a huge spreadsheet of like, does this queue work with this card type and not this one? And it was impossible. It was just impossible. I eventually gave up on that. And this was the sweet spot. Like this, everything clicked when we did double sided. And then it also lets them, like, something that we were not able to do for Story Engine or Deck of Worlds is like, we want to write that cues that are really, really specific to what makes the card category interesting. Like what makes materials and material culture interesting, what makes a species interesting, what makes a faction interesting. We got to go so much deeper because we could really like ask questions about, like this category of human life and culture. Why is that interesting, and how can you play with it? So that unlocked so much for us. And then in terms of the overlapping thing, so the connection between those things is intentional. We wanted those cards to be swappable between decks, and they're roughly swappable. Part of it was that this deck needs to stand alone, so it needs to have cards that are people. Like we can't build a world without people. So it was accepting that and trying to write as many new queues as possible. And then I think the 2 big differences are the ways that the card queues are balanced on figure cards versus agent cards are very different. Agent cards in the primary Story Engine deck are built around having one very broad prompt at the bottom that is like kind of the concept of the card, and then 3 prompts that are sort of specific expressions of that larger idea. So actually, I've got my Leviathan box in front of me here, or the prototype of it. So I'm going to quickly pull cards because it's so easy to do. It's just so easy to do. And I'm going to turn on the camera again. I've been nudging the tripod, so it's very out of place right now. But
I feel like this is Peter's like low-key way of saying he really wants to build prompts.
No, we're not gonna. I promise we're not. But this is just to give an example. So student is a very broad category of person, and then a bookworm is like one manifestation of a student, perhaps, or it's tied into the theme, but it's more specific. An amateur is another expression of it. You could move amateur to student, like those are both equally broad, and then apprentice is a much more specific version of a student. Like there's a context that arises around that. And so the main deck cards are balanced to help literal thinkers, and then broad-minded thinkers always have something they can work with on the queue. So there's always something as specific as an apprentice, where if like you have a really literal mind, you know what an apprentice is. You'll think of someone in a job, and it feels more tangible. Or if you're much more like, no, I want like an open-ended prompt where I decide what it means, you grab student. And basically the sides represent like iterations on a theme, so it keeps you focused on one thought category. That's how Story Engine queues work. Lore Master's deck works really differently. Instead, we have one what I would call social role. So it's not like a job, but it's like kind of a function that exists in society or in groups that's interesting to note. So like believer here is an example of like what I would call a social role. Like you would never get paid to be a believer, but we need people in society who contribute this role. And then there tended to be 3 jobs, and the jobs needed to reflect different aspects of human life. So a driver, a coach, and a seafarer. Seafarer and driver are actually a little bit similar, but different enough. But they're both people whose job is to transport things or people from one place to another. But coach is super different from that, and also seafarer, that context is super different. So what we wanted for Lore Master's deck, knowing that people were going to be open to a bit more of an advanced prompting experience, was as much variety as possible. We wanted to have a divergence of material on the same card so that there was a lot of different areas of human life, experiences of human life that can be represented on the same card. So rather than clustering a theme, we tried to diversify a theme. So the categories are different, and that's true for all of the parallel card types. The categories that we emphasize, the way that we balance the cues tends to be very different. So you can still swap, the cards still work, but they're really optimized for the type. And then because we were doing the double siding, we got to go again really granular with secondary cues. Like we got to get to do like missing significant memories is such a specific thing that you could only do with the deck with people. You couldn't attach that to an object or a location. Like that's very much a people thing. Speaks a dead language, similar thing. So yeah, that's basically the way that division broke down.
And I will say,
go for it, Eric.
I will say too, it's like talking about like the specificity of how deep we got to go. It's like those secondary cues are really what makes a lot of prompts pop, or you get something just like really granular and really evocative, where it's like sometimes you get that from the primary cues, but they are by design like not like filtering you towards one thing. You're supposed to be a little bit more broad so you can expand, but then you flip over the secondary cues and it just comes to life.
Yeah.
I think what I would be really curious to know for anyone who played the closed beta, and I'm gonna also reserve this question for next week when we release the open beta. I would be curious to see how you guys start drawing and treating these cards now that you have 2 sides to work with. It's like you're not only just like now, before you have a single side, you have 4 choices, so to say. Now you have 8 choices, but in some ways those 8 choices are not the same choice. So now you have to decide whether you want to use one side of your figure or factions card or material card, or you want to use the other side, which is qualify version. Because I can definitely see myself looking at the first side and being like, I like those, and then flipping the other one's like, oh, but I like the descriptor of these. And then like having some internal struggle of how I want to use all these versions of just one card alone, because that takes you down 2 different pathways.
Yeah, and I know there was another question, I think also from Royce. Let's take a look here.
Thank you for all your questions, by the way. We got we got them through email, we got them through BackerKit. We're getting them now on the live, but we're gonna do our best to answer as many of them as possible. Because I know a lot of you have probably been wanting to get the thoughts on some of these. That's presumptuous, but I was very flattered when I received all the questions. So there's like a lot of things that we want to be able to share with you, and obviously if there's things that you're curious about. I know a few of you have asked for some like more, I guess, like specific logistical based questions on our releases and stuff, and we're not avoiding those. We want to get to those too. So but I thought I would try and like wrap those up in like one go so that you guys get all those things right away. But keep your questions coming. We'll hang out for as long as we can, obviously. So obviously we always try and answer everything, whether it is in BackerKit, through email, through socials. So if you have ongoing things, always please engage with us. We're Story Engine Deck on Instagram, Threads, Facebook,
Blue Sky, or
Twitter.
Blue Sky as well.
I call it Twitter. I'm gonna call it Twitter till the day I die. Yeah, Blue Sky. We obviously are on YouTube. We exist everywhere. I know there's a couple amazing like fan-based collectives. The Story Engine Creator Collective is a fan-based group of creators who've all come together and doing amazing things with our deck and beyond. They have a Discord as well. I think I covered all the bases on how you can reach us in all our socials, but well, rolling back to Marcel, Eric, if you want to frame the question for Peter and I to look at.
Oh, you're muted, I think.
So yeah, this one came in a couple of days ago, but Marcel on BackerKit was asking if there's a any kind of system that we use to determine which word or theme goes on what card. And I think you just answered a little bit of that, talking about kind of like the figure cards, wanting to have like a social role and then different professions. But we did apply similar thinking to across all card types.
Yeah, and the other thing that and figures is a less good example of this, but factions is actually I think a great example. Is we have a way of defining the categories of ideas that we're going to brainstorm. So like when we're designing factions, like what is a faction? One of the ways that you sort of break the task down of brainstorming factions is to think of like categories that factions fall into. So what I ended up doing was coming up with categories like military factions, um, political based factions, community and secular based factions, and then religion or spirituality based factions. So I came up with sort of like theme groupings. And the reason that this is really helpful is like even just for those first iterations of the deck, um, when I laid these out in a table to export into a design format, I could make sure that every card already had a baked in amount of diversity. So let's look at a faction card here, actually. I keep kicking this thing. Honk. A faction card. Um, so right off the bat, you can see we have like a variety of things going on. We have a union, which is kind of like based around work, but could also be outside of work. We have a battalion, which is military. We have a city, which is very much like municipal, political, secular lines. And then we have a college, which I think college in this case was the one that union ended up being the spiritual one because we thought it could work spiritually, or it could work for other things in multiple meanings. Military, political, and then secular was the way that we define those. So this card, like you're guaranteed for your first draft to have really, really good variety on every card. If you can figure out what your primary categories are going to be, divide your brainstorms up into that, and then it becomes really easy to drop them into place. And then as we iterated on the deck, we would go through and like Eric and I would each did a pass reading through the deck of looking for like similar themes. Actually, you Eric, because I tagged you into that process for the first time. I've been doing that for a while. What was your experience of doing that like when you're reading through 600 cards to try and make sure that every card, all the cues feel different?
It was definitely intimidating. Not quite as intimidating because it's 36 per card, so you can kind of go through one category and feel like you're getting a lot. Like some were easier than others. Like actually, the materials deck was probably one of the fastest ones to proofread because there's just so many different types of materials that
Yep.
people go collect and gather. So that one's pretty easy. The faction deck is definitely the one that stands out the most because I remember that first pass there were a lot of military cues because like every single card had a military cue, and a lot of them did feel, for lack of a better word, forced. It was like we were really reaching for deep into the synonym bucket to kind of come up with different ways of like categorizing people in a military unit, and it was just kind of figuring out what felt like a thing I wanted to explore, and what didn't feel like it had much potential, like what felt redundant, what felt like it was taking an opportunity that might be better used somewhere else. And yeah, it's really just kind of like, does whatever, as I'm reading through this list of cues, as I get near the bottom, does this feel like a thing that still feels original and fresh? Or does this feel like a thing that I've already seen somewhere higher up in the spreadsheet?
Yeah, that's another very good way to put it. And then the hard part then is like we would vote on which version we want to cut and keep, and those would sometimes be different. So there was like so much thought went into those like iterations and iterations of revisions. And yeah, so for factions, those are kind of the category types. For figures, I mentioned it already. For events, we divide them into usually we have two different types of social based events. One of which is often a bit more like conflict based, and the other one might be less conflict based. But we would also have one disaster and or act of God type scenario, and then one abstract scenario where the word doesn't immediately mean anything, but it could mean a lot of different things. So like sacrifice, I think is a great example of an event that could be like a metaphorical sacrifice, it could be a literal sacrifice, but we'd go for something really broad and abstract that left room to read in. For locations, we always had a building. We had something that was constructed, but that might not be a building, but that would still imply that like it was a modified environment. It's not a natural environment. And then we would usually do two natural environments or one sort of hybrid thing. Like a park is an example of something that's both constructed and natural. So a lot of hybrid things ended up in that category. And that lets, our locations cover a variety of different needs. Objects are divided into weapons, equipment, wearable or repairable items, and then sort of an oddball category of others where we'd include things like vehicles or like an orb, a jar, things like that would end up there, a holster. Materials, we had like ingredients that would be put into something like food or a potion or that would be used to make something else. We had crafting materials, so things that you'd use to build an object that's portable. Building materials, so things that are used to build larger structures. And then another sort of wild card category for things like fuel or fertilizer or chalk, which wouldn't quite fit anything else. And then creatures, we had one for like high level general animals. So like these are things that usually have a multiple species under the headline. So like a raptor is a bird of prey, and there's lots of different birds that fit under that type. A reptile is kind of a high level category. And then we'd also have a specific animal that was not a predator, a specific animal that was a predator, or a dangerous animal that could represent like a threat. And then we had a wildcard section where we'd put a lot of the non-mobile organisms, so like a fungus or a vine or a plant or a tree, and also where we put all of the weird fantasy animals like a hydra or a drake or a dragon or something like that. Yeah, so a lot of thought went into balancing those. And all of my decks have some kind of categorization system to make sure that the cards do a variety of things that they need to do to make it work. I loved this question because it taps on something that I love about deck design.
And I think it's even worth noting, kind of like one of the hardest ones to do was the now the modifier deck, because it was also kind of like trying to categorize it where it's like you ran into that problem where not every single adjective was going to work with every card type. So making sure that you had enough variety across all 8 of those card types on each card, basically. So you kind of had like at least one that fit with every type of card.
Yeah, that was definitely a challenge. That we did another couple passes on both the modifiers, and then also on the namesakes deck operates in a very similar way. We had to do that again.
It's
Cool.
probably like as a follow-up to that question, sort of where the deities expansion ended up coming out the way it did is because it was in those moments where you realize certain things don't actually fit into a figure. Like deities, it's like you can replace figures with them, but they can't really necessarily exist in the deck by itself. And that's how when you start splicing out certain things like deities, emblems, or namesakes. And in some ways, I guess maybe this is a separate tangent, like I guess I'm segueing a little bit into sort of where the bridge expansions came in, because the bridge expansion almost didn't happen. I know when we were talking about how the decks would talk to each other, I think Peter and all your, I guess, being the god creator was like, well, you just connect them and then they just talk. And I was like,
you just do it because you know how, because you designed it and it makes sense to you.
Yeah, and I was like, well, I can tell you that I think people would like to be given some options that would really help them build the bridge. Like not all of us can manifest the bridge instantaneously, or like, I don't know, some of us can teleport, some of us can fly, and some of us can swim, but some of us definitely need a bridge.
Yeah,
Maybe the way I sort of thought about it.
They were super popular. Like I'm so glad that you advocated for those. And actually, and something that we'll get into when we do the bridge demo. I can't remember which date that is, but okay. In case you didn't know, we're doing weekly live streams every Thursday at this time until March 14th. We're going to be unveiling different expansions. Basically, if you have access to a PDF copy of that as part of your pledge, or if you pre-order a PDF access to that copy, you will be included in the open beta for that particular expansion. So you can join us as we distribute live those things every week. When we do the bridge expansions, I'm really excited to talk about. They got revamped actually after the campaign finished. During the campaign, I presented a particular model for them that I was still thinking, like, I think we can do better. And then I had a bunch of brainwaves and playtesting time in September and October that they're so much cooler now. They do a much wider variety of things, and I think they're really sick.
Mm-hmm.
So
and I mean, if people want to know, just for simplicity's sake, they will be at 3 p.m. Eastern time every week. So of course, next week is the launch of our open beta. So if you haven't marked your calendars yet, do so. And of course, if you're on the fence, or if you know someone who's on the fence about pre-ordering the deck, if they pre-order before the 8th, they will get access to the open beta. So now's the time to take advantage of that. I do have the calendar in hand, so even though we haven't quite made the events, if you folks want to mark your calendars,
I made the events just earlier this week because I knew we'd want to.
Well, there you go.
I just dropped the link in the chats.
Okay, so yes, so there you go. You have access to all the streams that are happening, but on the 15th is when we're going to be talking about the namesakes expansion. The 22nd is when we're talking about the emblems expansion. The 29th is when we're talking about the bridge expansions. The 7th is when we're talking about the Deities expansion. And then, of course, we have yet another launch coming up on the 14th to kind of wrap it all up. So lots of things coming up. If it's a time for you to kind of have questions about those specific expansions, that's probably the place to do it.
And while we're on that subject, we do have one question from the writer who asked, will the PDFs in the will that March 14th launch include the outtakes deck and the quick start prompts deck that were part of the original campaign?
It probably will not include the quick start prompts deck. We're going to see about getting the oddballs and expansions ready for then. Oddballs and expansions, all that material that Eric and I debated for hours and hours and hours, things that got cut, a lot of it was able to be saved for oddballs and expansions. So like it's our favorite moments from the cutting room floor. And then it's also ideas that were like super duper interesting, but not broad enough to cover a lot. Because sometimes one queue in the deck would need to do a lot of different things. And if we had a really good multi-tool queue, we'd have to cut some of the really specific, interesting queues that would do something similar. So a lot of those really cool, highly specific queues are going to show up in oddballs. It's going to be a lot of fun. But that said, other than collecting all of the material in a section of the spreadsheet, I haven't done the playtesting or the balance of it yet. So the primary focus is going to be on getting all the print and plays polished and making sure that the eco-friendly versions that we produce of everything are ready, because all of our iterations so far have just been focused on the fully designed versions. That's our main focus. So it's going to depend. I'm not going to promise it, but it's definitely possible. It might happen with outtakes and expansions. But I don't think the quick starts will happen until later. I think you're muted, Miroki.
Know that our main products are coming out, and if some of our extra, I call them the fun decks, the little fun pieces, if they don't come out on the 14th, they will come out as soon as we can. We would love to get them in your hot little hands. A very lovely question from Ty Woods. I hope it's Ty, not Tay. I'll use both, Ty and Tay. Asking to know how much for all of them. Well, you're in luck. You can always check us out at Story Engine Deck/lore to find out, because we do have some great bundle deals that are only available at this point in our pre-order store, where you can get everything. When you say everything, I don't know if you mean just Lore Masters deck everything or everything, because we do have Story Engine Deck and Deck of Worlds up there as well. If you kind of want to get the whole kit and caboodle, it is available there. Those bundle prices will only exist on our pre-order store. When things eventually switch over, we will be moving more to our like regular retail prices. So if you want to take advantage, that's really the best time. If you buy the whole thing, you also save money on shipping as well. You'll get it all in one fell swoop when we fulfill later on at the end of this year. So yeah, you can check us out, Story Engine Deck/lore, in our pre-order store for all the stuff, and check out all the different bundles that we have. We do have bundles for just the Lore Masters deck, and we have bundles for everything. Oh, there you go, Lore Masters deck everything. We do have a Lore Masters deck everything on the page, and it's at a nice bundle price for you. So please do check it out, and share the word with your friends as well. I can't tell you what it is for that bundle, because I have bundled so many prices in my head at this point that I can't I don't know, pull the number out, and in multiple currencies to boot. So but if you go on the pre-order site, it will tell you in USD, I think, is what it will tell you.
The all lore bundle, which includes the Lore Masters deck, the 3 Lore Mastery expansions, and 2 of the Bridge expansions, is $119. The one that includes all new decks, so that includes all 3 Bridge expansions, is $120. The all lore bundle also includes the Weave Your Lore pin, which is why the price is a little bit similar, despite having one less deck.
Don't we have a tier called don't we have a bundle called Conjure, which not only includes all our newest decks, but also includes our newest storage box systems as well, which I know we didn't talk about at all on this live stream, and we're frankly running close out of time. We'll just have to talk about all our fun accessories ad nauseum come our launch next week. But we do have some really great storage systems that I think is included
so big,
in the
it doesn't fit on
It's
camera.
so big.
I'm not kidding. Like this is the size of the whole playmat. I can't crank the camera any further. But yeah,
it's called Leviathan for a reason.
Yeah, this is the dummy box of the Leviathan, so there's no printing on it. It's just printed white. And also this is cardboard. We're gonna be using gray board for the final deck, but it's how we got to test the tray system. And I'm just loving it. Like it's
Check
made
out
live
our
stream.
Instagram to see Peter flip the box over
Oh,
and
yeah.
over and over again, violently stress testing it and tossing it across the
Yeah.
room.
I'm literally throwing it in the air like I'm stretching a pizza dough.
If you really want to stress test, you toss it off the roof of your building.
Oh, challenge accepted. My landlord would be very upset if our building does not have a roof that you're supposed to be able to access. But hey, if you
Honestly,
dare me,
I
I'll
was
drop
more
it from a higher height.
honestly, I was more impressed that I had no idea that there were actually cards in it. You were flipping it so intensely. I thought you were just testing like the framework of the box, and then I think at the end of the I'm giving things away. You open. I was like, what? It actually has cards in it, and they didn't move. And I think that's one of the things I always like hated about any storage system I ever had for board games was if you shook it even gently, you open the box and your whole like array is messed up inside. The Leviathan box survived that, so yay! Good job, Leviathan
I wanted to
box.
have the trays were the sweet spot of like big enough to be able to do multiple things or hold a big card category, but not so big that cards will slosh around if you only have a few in there. And that was me really testing like, will the cards stay in place? And they will. Also, we had a very down to earth question earlier that I did want to get back to, which is just when
Yes,
pledge
of
money can be
course.
collected. So we'll be posting. It's now we've added this to the FAQ. We'll also be posting an update ahead of it, but basically in advance of the March 14th everything launch, we're going to be taking down the open betas, locking pledges, which will give you 48 hours to like update what you want in your pledge, and then we'll be charging cards. And when we charge cards, if your card fails, it'll contact you about how to fix it. You're not being like cut out, but basically at that point, the PDF access will be for pledges that are fully paid up. We'll be running cards. We'll be helping you if you need any help resolving a payment issue. We'll be there to support, and that's when we'll be doing the final charges. So if you backed on BackerKit, you've paid your principal pledge, but you'll be paying your tax if it's relevant to your region, and you'll be paying for your shipping. If you had just a PDF pledge, there may be no things required, but you'll actually see what's owing in BackerKit basically. And for new pledges, we charge new pledges once a week, I believe. We charge new pledges. So if you're placing a new order with us, a new pre-order, that'll be charged within a week of you placing it.
Yeah, and BackerKit is really responsive as well. So if you're having any issues with the payment system or with BackerKit, you can always drop a note to their customer service line. They're usually really responsive, and if it's something that actually is meant to be directed at us or something that the two of us need to work together to resolve, they generally will communicate with us on how to solve the issue for you. So between all of us, all three of us over here, because that's basically the entire team, guys. Like there's no hidden elves in the back helping us along in creating these decks. It's Peter and myself, and then Eric kind of talking to all you lovely folks at any given point. Between us and the BackerKit team, hopefully we'll get you everything that you need. We do have a placemat for Lore Master's deck.
I'm actually just pulling it up right now, so we can share what it
grab
looks
the wrong
like.
one.
It says weave your lore.
Yes, it says weave your lore. So yes, I think that's all in the Conjure tier, my friends. So if you go check, look at the different pre-order bundles, I'm pretty sure Conjure contains like all of our accessories, whether it's Lore Master's Journal, the playmat, our storage boxes. We have several different storage boxes, and our pins, which I think are adorable. I'm an enamel pin collector. I'm an obsessive. I have many enamel pins. I was collecting pins since I was 13, so I'm excited to kind of have like one based around the story engine system. And I have to, we were talking about bridges earlier and our storage systems. I will have to express my bias here, and that our collector box for the bridge expansions, like we have these cute cigar box where Peter and I and both of our like old man in the library sipping a glass of whiskey aesthetic, which is like both of our vibes. Probably Eric's vibe as well. Kept talking about these collector boxes for our expansion systems that that we call them cigar boxes, but the bridge expansions one, I love it so much. When the final design came, I messaged like Peter and Zach, because I know those two were really the masterminds behind it, and I was like, bleep guys, I'll try and keep this slightly G-rated. Bleep guys, like I love this bleeping design. I want to make jewelry out of it. I want to make tote bags out of it. I want to make t-shirts out of it. I'm obsessed with it. Just saying, guys. Not to try and bump up pre-orders for the bridge box, but I want that bridge box, and I probably will not use it for the decks. I'll probably just go off and like use it for something of my own, so I can like stare at it every day or something. It's beautiful.
Your call here. Permission to share. I can show her a little glimpse of the print file with the flat lays of the box, or we can save it for when we actually have physical. You know, we're probably already doing an unboxing video when we get the print samples, so maybe we save it. I have them.
I know.
Looking at them in their
Yeah. No, we need a reason for you guys to all come back. We need a reason for you guys to come back and check us out. Maybe if we're really generous, maybe during the bridge expansions, we'll like.
Oh, that might be a time. That'd be a fun time to do a little reveal.
Big brain thoughts. So, well, I think we're probably gonna wrap up in the next few minutes because we just have too much fun and we just clearly don't want to leave y'all. But if you guys have any like final burning comments or questions, now's the time to rapid fire them out. And we'll try and answer them. I'm gonna try and let's see if there's any other specific questions that I can try and answer super quickly. There were a couple that came in from I think it was David, Joyner, and Tara asking us about like some specific deck ideas, such as like decks designed for historical fiction, writing this is very specific, historical fiction set during 1700s to 1800s America. We have a fun one from Tara asking about seasonal or holiday themed expansions for any of our systems, whether it's Lore Master, Story Engine, or Deck of Worlds. Guys, like we have so many ideas we always want to be putting out there. I'm pretty sure that if you keep feeding Peter some, he's gonna go off and tell me he wants to create XYZ expansions. But in all seriousness, like we have some thoughts with regards to what like new expansion pieces might be on the docket for Story Engine or Deck of Worlds. Peter, I see you like having a little bit of a smirk, and I'm like, I'm not sure what that means. Like,
I've got you won't hate this. This was the closest thing we have to this is some might argue it's either a Halloween expansion or an April Fool's expansion. It's a fake expansion that I announced for April Fool's Day 2021. I'm gonna just content warning if you don't like scary clowns, because these are like very intensely scary clowns. I didn't say it was fake. I'm like, we're gonna do 2 new expansions. And let me just share the screen again here, because it was so horrifying. This was all the clowns we found in your nightmares expansion that I said we were gonna do. This is answering
I don't like that I've just been exposed to this.
And then I did another one of these too.
I really do not appreciate being exposed to this right now.
Oh yeah. And look, the name of the expansion in the small print in red at the bottom is oh shit, we found more clowns. Clown Nightmare Double Down expansion. Like, oh no, we really want to go for this. So that is my answer to Tara's question. That doesn't answer David's question. What I would say to David is like for that, the core deck is designed to be very like world and setting universal of the Story Engine deck. So I would still go back to that, because all of those cues are going to be interpretable in variety in pretty much any time period you want, any kind of world or technology level you want. So that the core ones can be great for you there.
Stop sharing this screen, Peter. Like for deck systems that have we have this many horror expansions and booster packs. Like I am not an R-rated horror person at all. So it's like I do not need this to imprint itself deep into my brain. I do not need. But yes, I guess like we do have some thoughts in the works about what our next expansion. I know there's been a lot of customer feedback on a romance expansion. We've heard this one loud and clear. That was my wheelhouse. So I would almost see myself like suddenly taking off my CEO hat, and like the crazy wild like writer Moroki might suddenly come on and be like, yes, I'm ready. So we have some thoughts about those. If people keep, what I say is, if you guys have thoughts on expansions that you think are necessary or like really fills a gap in niche, always just like drop us a note. Like we do try and catalog and hear what you guys are saying in terms of what we could be doing next for you folks. As for seasonal ones, I think, like not promising anything, but maybe if it's just like not necessarily something in hard print, but even if we create some cool virtual cards for you guys when those seasons come around, I don't know, it's worth exploring an auto shuffle machine, branching off into expansions at a whole new level. Auto shuffle. Oh my God, Peter! Maybe as we start wrapping up here, I don't. I remember Jasmine and your wife shared a really intense accessory idea to us at one point, and I was like, the idea sounds really great. Maybe when we get to a scale where we can manufacture some really hardcore items, we'll
Whenever
get there.
Jasmine shares an expansion idea for me, it's always like the coolest thing in the world that I have no idea how to build. Just like it'd be so cool and elegant and thoughtful, and I truly don't know how to begin for like structuring it. But at some point, I do want one of those to come to life.
Mhm.
Lit RPG expansion would be an interesting one. I actually only learned about the lit RPG genre like literally last week. I hadn't heard of it until then. I was talking with a friend who's a book editor and sort of a book marketing person. I was talking about like just how interesting the lit RPG space is and how much fun it is. And then I ended up on a panel with TBRCon, which is an online convention that we're sponsoring, moderating a panel with 2 lit RPG publishers, which was really cool. So I got to learn a little bit more about it. So who knows? It's been added to my thought soup, and things that end up in thought soup sometimes will end up in a future story engine dish, sometimes not, but always a chance.
And I think I saw one final logistics-based question about getting bonuses if they do the pre-orders now. I would assume that the bonuses that you're referring to is probably our early bird bonuses and our returning backer bonuses. The early bird one was an exclusive for our backers if they backed within the first 72 hours of the campaign. But I do believe that if you wish to add it to your collection, it is available in our store. So if you're like someone who's like, I'm a completist and I want all the promo cards and I want all the little bonuses, they all exist in the pre-order store and you have access to it as well. I would say our biggest bonus to anyone who buys on the pre-order store is that unlike our regular store, our pre-order store, because it is a pre-order, it is part of our campaign. When you purchase if you pre-order our physical decks of anything, you get the PDFs with them. So that I would say that's one of our most exclusive things through going through our BackerKit store and pre-ordering through BackerKit is that you do get that added PDFs if you're buying physical products from our store. And of course, like I said, bundled shipping, all of that good stuff.
The one exception to that is some of the single physical expansions. So any bundle, you do get the PDFs included, but if you say just buy the deities expansion as a standalone, it doesn't include the PDFs.
Yeah. So but I think I think we might be able to figure out a way to share the beta with you if if you bought just the single expansion. I might have just completely given something away that Naruki, do the thing, do your own chief executive officer thing, which is making sure all your ducks are in a row in a spreadsheet before you say certain things. But there we have it. Yeah. I think we've covered everything. Thank you guys all so much thank you guys all so much for joining us today. It's great to be back. I know we've made a commitment to ourselves to do more live streams this year. I know it's something that you've all requested for a while, and then we were like, yes, and then we do one. So then we vanish into a hole again, and we're like, yes, we'll do it again. But we actually are now. We're gonna do many over the coming 2 months.
I'm really looking forward to it. I had so much fun in the last run of these, and I'm really excited to share the new content with folks and get to start creating with it. Yeah, so we're back next week at 3 p.m. Eastern. We will be clicking the distribute button live to send all the PDFs out and then diving right into some prompts creating with you. You'll be voting on which queues you want us to use. As we build out, we're going to use the core deck for the initial launch, and then we'll be doing deep dives in each expansion week by week until March 14th when we unleash the final versions of absolutely everything as print and plays. And we're going to do a big combination thing where we pull all the expansions together and build some really weird, fun stuff. And I can't wait.
Yeah, make sure you set your calendars and pre-order your decks. And we'll see you all on February 8th.
See you all on February 8th. Bye.